on all the news channels. I've just been watching CNN for the last hour. And it just wouldn't feel quite right to talk about Ukraine. So I think it is right to talk about this, whilst recognizing that Charlie Kirk was a human, with a parent, a husband, he had friends, and a very dedicated following. And so we must absolutely condemn any kind of such violence like this. Political violence is absolutely 100% not the way to go, and it's completely awful. Is it too early to be talking about, well, where do we go from here? What's going to be the outcome? No, I am not someone who's a fan of, when there are these mass shootings, people saying, oh, just thoughts and prayers. And no, this is too soon. What are you doing trying to politicize this? Or what are you doing trying to, talk about gun control? Or what are you doing? No, this is exactly the time you need to deal with these issues, because otherwise it doesn't have the emotive purchase. It doesn't have the real world connection to the effects of, whether it be violent rhetoric, whether it be guns, whatever it is. So these are the times, I think, to talk about this. But sorry, again, before I bring Jonathan in, I'm just going to show you the video up to a certain point. And part of what I wanted why I want to show you this is, first of all, to give you the context of kind of what he was doing, what he was about, but also the possibly, I don't know whether the shooting was timed because of the content of what's being discussed, or if not, then the deep, dark irony of the cosmos in how this came about. So I'll play this for you.
So do you know how many transgender Americans have been mass shooters over the last 10 years?
Too many.
Okay, now 5 is a lot, right? I'm going to give you some credit. Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years?
Counting or not counting gang violence?
Great.
Okay, and he then gets shot, and he gets shot in the neck, and it all goes from there. So he was literally answering a question, I presume, from a liberal that was supposed to engender some kind of debate about gun violence. And that was the moment he was shot. And it just makes me wonder whether there was some kind of purposeful timing to that. The person who would have shot him, I believe, did so from at least 200 yards from a building behind, and has not been caught. He is still at large, even though there were initial reports that someone had been arrested. But I think that was someone that was arrested for some other somewhat connected reason to events, but wasn't the perpetrator. So they're still at large, but it was a targeted killing because of the whole nature of how Charlie Kirk was shot. So this wasn't a spur of the moment sort of thing. This seemed to be, if you like, a sort of assassination. I don't know if that's a right word, the murder of Charlie Kirk, that's for sure. So yeah, condemnation, 100% condemnation. Political violence is never the way to go. Well, you can talk about revolution and whatnot, and whether, but anyway, I don't want to. This kind of political violence is definitely not the way to go. So with that in mind, though, we are going to be talking about, I believe, with Jonathan, the kind of politicization of this, the weaponization of this, and where the United States particularly goes from here. So sorry, Jonathan, welcome, and I'd be interested in your initial thoughts.
Is it coincidental? It must be coincidental that it comes on the very day that Poland triggers Article 4 and there's a mass strike. It just adds the sense of sort of chaos in the world, of course. But when you think, one headline is going to dominate the day, the week, the month, another one comes along and just bumps it off at the top. Sorry, no pun intended there. It is obviously horrific for his family. He's clearly a divisive figure amongst those in the center and left. it isn't a real word, but a provocationist. He's someone who clearly, relished the provocation, who clearly relished getting up in the face of people who he termed sort of liberal, antagonizing people. We see, of course, that is a great way to make money these days. There's a lot of podcasters who make money off a combination of their sort of shock rhetoric and combining sort of certain, I would say, values or principles with it, but also, weaponizing things like identity politics. And he was one of the most expert at it. So I think a lot of the news coverage is saying, look, for those who haven't really heard of him or come across him, this is a huge, huge deal. He is one of the leading voices of the MAGA movement. I think it's appropriate to discuss it, not necessarily sort of, all the gory details, and it's pretty nasty the way he went. I mean, no one, we shouldn't wish that on anybody at all. But it's appropriate, I think, to discuss it, because the question is, how is the Trump regime going to weaponize this? This is, in some ways, a political gift. In some ways, this is potentially going to turn the US in on itself in a very divisive way, which means it may well be distracted to such an extent that what's happening outside the US seems less important than it did just a few hours ago. And let's face it, what's happening outside the US was already pretty down most people's radars or down their priority list. So that, I think, is going to be a real issue.
Somebody says, Jason Nelm says they got the shooter and the whole damn well witnessed it. I don't know if that refers to the arrest of one of the people there. They've subsequently come out and said that is not the perpetrator. So they do not have the shooter, and the shooter is still at large. They went back on saying this older man who was actually lifted up and escorted out in handcuffs, he wasn't the perpetrator. But yeah, to be perfectly frank here, Charlie Kirk is not my cup of tea in any way, shape, or form. I was just speaking to one of my sons, because I was speaking to Oscar some months back when he was caught in this algorithm on TikTok where he started to get Andrew Tate and Charlie Kirk. And I had to sit down and say, look, like, these guys are not good guys. I do not like them. And this is why I don't like them. And I'm trying to explain. And he's like, then intuitively defensive and coming back and saying, no, these are great guys. I was like, have you seen videos? I can show you videos, but I don't want to, but I can show you horrific videos of Andrew Tate that I'm sure we would agree he's not a good guy. Charlie Kirk, X, Y, and Z, right? So I'm not a fan of Charlie Kirk. And I was just speaking to Oscar just then because he was one that came and told me, having seen it on TikTok of all places, and we then put on the news and watched it together. But I was talking to him just then about this very uncomfortable situation and tension where when someone gets shot, you have these sympathies that go out immediately. Just well, certainly for me anyway, like an empathy of like, oh my goodness, somebody has died. That's horrible. And then I have this dissonance in my head, a cognitive dissonance whereby like I have sympathy for this guy, for these, the people who his family and friends, etc. But I also recognize that I've just spent the last 7-8 years despising this man, to be quite honest, like not liking him at all. And I have to be
a little bit like when Lindsey Graham passed away, and it's suddenly everything's forgiven really unless you really detested what that person did in the world.
Yeah, not Lindsey Graham, that's Billy Graham, I presume.
Billy Graham, sorry. Yeah, wrong one. Well,
yes. I thought,
not a big fan of the other one either.
Yeah. But so there is going to be a dissonance. Like I can sit here and talk to you about how his views on women, his views on sexuality, his views on religion, his views on all sorts of things. I completely 100% disagree with, but I don't know how useful that is, right? So what I am going to show you is a couple of things that I think are worthy of discussion, and I hope it's not being insensitive. So first of all, obviously Donald Trump announced his death. He pretty much broke it, Trump. The great and even legendary Charlie Kirk is dead. No one understood or had the heart of the youth in the United States of America better than Charlie. He was loved and admired by all caps. I think that's a bit overdoing it, but I understand his sort of rhetoric here, especially me. And now he is no longer with us, Melania, and my sympathies go out to his beautiful wife, Erica, and family. Charlie, we love you. So that was from Donald Trump. It's also worth noting that at the same time as this was happening, a high school, Evergreen High School, I believe in Denver, Colorado, 2 kids have been shot. So, you know, spare a thought for the many other people that are shot every single day in the US. Now, I know Charlie Kirk has to be super famous and he will get all sorts of sympathies, but, you know, this fits into a larger conversation about gun violence. And I guess the Second Amendment, which is, for those who don't know, the right to bear arms as amended into the Constitution. And it's just so, you know, this is why I wonder if this is too soon, if you like, to say something like this. I'm just going to get my ducks in a row here. But
I suspect not, because I think whereas these plaudits are coming out from Trump and others, and I think everyone will have a moment of reflection, there will be some people in positions of power who will immediately be thinking how they can leverage this. So I think it's not too soon to say, not about, you know, this guy and his legacy and whether it's toxic and all the rest of it, but how are people going to manipulate this to their own advantage? There's no question. I mean, I'm calling this episode Turning Point. One could provocatively call it perhaps, you know, America's Kristallnacht or something, because if this becomes a catalyst for moves that were already planned, but just waiting for a sort of, you know, provocation or the right moment, then this is when it's going to happen.
So we'll get onto that in a second, Jonathan, because that is kind of where we're going to go with this. So Charlie Kirk says gun deaths, quote, unfortunately worth it to keep Second Amendment. And that was a title, I don't know what media outlet, but he was advocating for the Second Amendment and saying, and there's this horrific irony here where he's saying, well, unfortunately, just the deaths are the collateral of the Second Amendment, and it's worth having the Second Amendment for, even though, you know, there are many people who die, and the numbers who die in the US every year are frightening when it comes to gun deaths. So for him to then advocate that and be the victim of that, to be one of those unfortunate people is, I don't know if I can think of another word other than irony again. And I just want to go to this one actually and play you what he says here.
So we need to be very clear that you're not going to get gun deaths to zero. It will not happen.
Right.
You can significantly reduce them through having more fathers in the home, by having more armed guards in front of schools. We should have an honest and clear reductionist view of gun violence, but we should not have a utopian one. You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry and you won't have a single gun death. That is nonsense. It's drivel. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational. Nobody talks like this. They live in a complete alternate universe. So we need to be very clear.
And so there is that. And without wanting to have this as a whole debate about gun violence, I mean, it's worth noting what the gun deaths in the US, 34,000 a year, something like that. And we have, I don't know, 5 or 6 in the UK. So when he talks about these utopias, you can have something approaching that. I mean, we don't have gun deaths. We have a problem with knives, and we have that problem precisely because we don't have guns. Imagine how bad it would be in the UK if we had guns, because every single knife death, or many of those knife deaths, could instead be gun deaths and have more deaths associated with them. So
they'd be multiplied, wouldn't it? Because,
exactly.
You know, in the time you stab 1 or 2 people, you could could shoot dozens. Sorry, I'm
Yes.
not getting emotional. I've just got a dry throat.
Yes, I'll let you clear your throat there, mate. But yeah, exactly. And you know, I don't know that this is the place because I don't have the stats and the wherewithal really to do the whole gun debate. But you know, I would disagree with him about gun violence, and unfortunately, he has suffered in terms of the availability of guns. I would have thought. Now, what we're really going to be talking about here, I guess, is this. Julia Ioffa says, things are about to get very, very bad in America. Tomorrow will be worse. Yeah, it is not going to be a healthy political environment going forward. Here we have Cenk Uygur, who's from the Young Turks, who says, and he's a progressive on the left, saying, what happened to Charlie Kirk is one of the worst things that has happened in American politics. My heart goes out to his family. F whoever did this, all caps. Not only is it deeply tragic by itself, but we are now all in danger. Violence is always wrong, and it's intellectual surrender. So I guess one of the first things to think about going forward for the United States is now everybody is vulnerable, and there will be a paranoia, there will be a hysteria, and there will be a sense that, am I safe to go and talk in public? I just listened to Scott Jennings on CNN, who is their Republican, real sort of MAGA-aligned Republican. I don't like Scott Jennings at all. I don't like his opinions. I don't like his style. And I actually, you know, he knows Charlie Kirk and was obviously very emotionally upset. But he was talking about, like, I don't think it's going to be safe for conservatives to go out and talk in public now. And I was like, I think that is a bit rich, and because I want to go on and talk about how, you know, it seems so very soon that people have forgotten. Say, for example, and I did a video on this. Funnily enough, Jonathan, I did a video last week on how the US has forgotten what happened to Melissa Hortman and her husband, a Michigan lawmaker who was, Minnesota lawmaker who was gunned down by Vance Belter, a Christian nationalist Trump Republican. Her dog was killed as well. And then he went on to injure another Minnesota lawmaker and his wife, right? And he was deeply, deeply Republican. And
that was this year, wasn't it? That was pretty recent. Yeah,
it was, what was it, June, was it, I think? And it was out of the news within a week, essentially. Trump never went to the funeral. I bet he'll go to Charlie Kirk's funeral. And so my point is that there will be politicization of this, because there already has been, and it's a real shame. It seems like everyone has forgotten, says this source, already forgotten about the man that was a Trump supporter and made a manifesto that had over 70 Democrats and abortion doctors on it to murder. He started out with a list through the Minnesota representative Melissa Hortman, her husband and dog, on July the 4th, killing them all. In July it was then. And so this leads on to this. So if you're thinking, well, hang on, there won't be that much politicization, Elon Musk has already started. So he has now come out and said the left is a party of murder, with Sean McGuire saying the left lectured us for the last decade about the dangers of violence from the right, from the assassination attempts of President Trump to Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO, being murdered. Now Charlie Kirk. The danger was actually on the left, of course, somewhat cherry picking like the data there and forgetting all the people on the other side of the coin. And all the murders there. So Elon Musk is doing it already. Here he says exactly to another source that's saying the left-wing mainstream media, as well as the figures like Gavin Newsom claiming Trump plans to be a dictator, has created a climate of hysteria against right-wing figures that could radicalize any number of unstable people to engage in political violence. Pray Charlie Kirk is okay. And of course, now he's passed away. But the idea is that this is a complete blinkered view. Like the rhetoric seemingly only coming from the left, when the rhetoric is so egregious from the right. The things that Donald Trump has said over the last however long, as it says here, the hypocrisy meter is off the charts. And Elon Musk saying exactly. And this is, I think it's really, really egregious that that there would be that overt politicization that is hugely cherry picked. In fact, just to finish this thought off, we could just go, if you want to look at data, we can go and say, just ask Google's AI, are mass shootings more likely right-wing or left-wing? Mass shootings in the United States are overwhelmingly more likely to be perpetrated by right-wing extremists, with right-wing extremists responsible for the great majority of extremist-related murders and mass killings in recent decades. Reports from organizations like the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, consistently show that right-wing ideologies, including white supremacy and sovereign white citizen extremism, are connected to significantly higher numbers of fatalities compared to left-wing or Islamist extremist violence in the US. And by the way, Islamist violence is also right-wing because it's conservative right-wing ideology, theocratic ideology. So don't think that Islamism is left-wing. And actually, I did a load of research on that topic for the video when Hauptmann was killed. And that really irritates me, that there's this inversion of reality, this upside down world we live in, and that frustrates the heck out of me.
And it all needs to be seen in a broader context of Trump weaponizing the media, the political sphere, sending the army on, for various spurious reasons into American cities. The videos we're seeing of people rounding up on the streets. To say that the hysteria is being stoked purely by the left is to ignore the entire reality of what's coming into our news feeds, which is sliding authoritarianism in the US. Now, violence isn't the answer, clearly, to that, but also laying down and being steamrolled is not the answer either. And this is, again, it seems to me a very Russian characteristic. And to make that connection with Poland here, the classic strategy of the bully is to attack you and then blame you when you fight back, call you the aggressor when you fight back against aggression. And this is also the response that I would expect to see from the right here as well, because the manipulation of grievance, that sort of weaponized personality of the bully, is something that seems to be apparent in a lot of the discourse and reactions here. So of course it's going to be used and weaponized to the nth degree, and they're going to try and blame everything on the other side, which is ludicrous and dangerous.
So SK, who's one of your subscribers, has just unsubscribed to you, unfortunately. Says Islamism is right-wing, get lost. Generally, like, theocracies are not seen as left-wing. Like, if you're talking about social, like, the people that complain about Islamic fundamentalism complain about the oppression of women, they complain about LGBTQ plus people being oppressed, they complain about strict moral strictures that are constraining your social freedoms, so on and so forth. So, like, I would love this person to set out, if they haven't already, like, turned off the video and run away. I'd love them to express how Islamist fundamentalism, especially where people go and kill people who don't belong to the same ideology as them, is somehow left wing. Certainly the social domain. I don't know that you can make much of it.
It's not liberal, put it that way.
Yeah,
It's not liberal. I mean, I would call it conservative within its own framework. Just because you may hold conservative Christian values, it may be abhorrent to you to think of Islamism as being conservative within its own framework, but it's exactly that. It is intolerant of other points of view. It's intolerant of other religions. It's intolerant of other ways of thinking. At the extreme end, even at the more moderate end, it's imbued with a whole range of intolerances. And I say this direct experience. I went to the wedding of a colleague because she was marrying a Hindu, and none of her family on the on the Islamic side came, and they were highly educated people, highly sophisticated people. So intolerance and that kind of extreme conservatism is absolutely a characteristic of it. I guess you may have politics may be different. You may have more socialist leaning things. I mean, one could say that some of the activities of Hamas and Hezbollah involved a sort of fairly extreme version of socialism, but it's socialism combined with gangsterism. So I don't know if I translate it to a sort of political framework.
Yeah, and I was just searching on AI then, and it's the conclusion from all the stuff that they've surveyed is in contemporary political discourse, Islamic fundamentalism is largely positioned on the right due to conservative social agenda and opposition to liberal values. But sorry, SK, you're not understanding what I was saying. I'm not saying Charlie Kirk is akin to Islamofascist. I've not at all said that. What I was saying is that when I was reading about whether the right or left wing is more responsible for mass shootings, if you are to differentiate the Islamofascist from the right wing, I think you're being incorrect, is what I was saying. It was nothing really to do with Charlie Kirk particularly at all. So I think you've massively misunderstood me there. Please don't. So now both sides are going to be, as you were saying, Jonathan, trying to look for their agenda here and trying to get trying to opportunistically use the death of Charlie Kirk to make a point. And so, for example, on the left here, you'll get people like saying this: Charlie Kirk has defended every massacre in Gaza and used every platform available to justify Israel's starvation campaign. So kind of like idea that here was Charlie Kirk, with these views that we didn't really like, and therefore he kind of deserved it or whatever, that kind of thing. And then you're going to get people on the right. And I really, really hope that Donald Trump, and I was just actually listening to some analysis on CNN, where one of the commentators was saying, look, I really hope, and they didn't actually mention Trump by name. They're talking about, I hope the leaders tomorrow. But reality was, I think they were meaning, I hope Donald Trump comes out tomorrow and doesn't just go full on into this is the left doing this and therefore doing a political division. What you need at a time like this is unity and people to somehow come together to work out how to stop this happening going forward. But the problem is that working out how to stop this going forward is itself incredibly divisive, because it usually involves discussions about gun control and whatnot. But I'm sure there'll be a temptation from almost everybody tomorrow to really try and drive this home polemically and polarize. There will be a huge polarization. And that will be.
You are talking about Donald Trump here, Jonathan. I mean, the idea of him coming out and being measured is ludicrous. He's going to come out all barrels blazing. I think we can fairly safely predict that. Again, horrible image, not quite intended there. From someone on the left here, Mehdi Hassan says, gun violence is out of control. The victims of gun violence are Republicans, Democrats, independents, and kids who have no political affiliation whatsoever. We need to tone down the incendiary political rhetoric for sure, but we also need to do something about guns, the guns. So there's someone who's then saying, well, this is a time to be talking again about gun control. But you'll get one side burying their head in the sand and the other side saying that this is what it's all about. And of course, the truth will be somewhere in the middle, where you need to sort out gun control, but you also need to sort out, I think, a growing landscape of political violence in general. And then what leads people to want to do things like this? Why is this a problem in the US, where there are other countries that have access to guns that don't have this this contagion? What is it about the United States that makes guns even more dangerous, if you like, in society? So, these questions are complex and no one's been able to solve them. And the problem is, and I was listening to Anna Kasparian talk about this over the last shooting that took place, the one in the school, in a Catholic school. And she was saying, look, there's never any change. Nothing ever gets done. It's just like, it's the most impotent, Congress is the most impotent thing. It just
is just unable to bring itself to be able to do anything about gun violence. And, you know, even if it's, you know, even if you're going to say, right, it's a mental health thing, then why do you keep defunding mental health? You know, if you're going to say it's a gun thing, then why do you not make any changes about gun legislation? If it's this, what, you know, whatever it is, Congress seems to be completely unable to deal with it. We've got Destiny, which is another kind of left-wing influencer, saying, I want to hear a single large political figure on the right say we need to bring down the rhetoric and temperature in this country on all sides before anyone on the left does this cut. We disavow violence as bad bullshit. This is the world Trump is building. Stop blindly closing your eyes to it and pretending it's not happening. So, yeah, already you're seeing this bubbling political discontent and the idea that the left and the right, you know, the left need to say something, the right need to say something. Here we've got the Tablet magazine, which I believe is a Catholic magazine. The left's rhetoric has normalized political violence. It's spread through rhetoric, media amplification, and policy, where opponents were cast as tyrants or fascists and made fair game. Who normalized political violence in America? So that's from 2024. But that's the idea. You know, you're seeing that kind of thing spread around the internet now again. So, you know, the left is blaming the right is blaming the left, but, you know, in the end, nothing will get done, I'm sure. And the US will continue to have political violence. Yeah, and you're on mute. I don't even get anything.
I mean, the challenge is if you do have an authoritarian slide, if you do have one party that is intent on gerrymandering the system, intent on, in some ways, this will play out in time, abolishing the norms of democracy, then you have to call it out. It's not incendiary to call it out. Unless you explicitly call for, you know, that resistance to be violent. And we certainly don't. And we wouldn't condone anyone who calls upon the resistance to Donald Trump to turn violent. But people expressing their political opinion should not be called incendiary. It's that sort of weaponization. And the irony is, you know, people who scream freedom of speech, and then spend their time shouting down those whom they disagree with for expressing, you know, their views. That is not a democratic culture or a healthy democratic culture. So I expect, yes, this will be weaponized. It will be utilized. But when you're talking to people who would prefer not to engage with any kind of reality or facts, you know, we're talking about the sort of gun crime statistics there. If you correlate that with the scale of lobbying, you'll find that if lawmakers are polled on whether they think there should be restrictions or more limitations on who can actually purchase guns and how they're stored, etc., you'll find that the voting patterns are actually completely out of whack with the constituents of those lawmakers. So then you have to look at, well, why are they not reflecting their values of their constituents, those who voted them in? The answer, of course, is that the system is entirely deformed by money. Huge gobbets of money being thrown at lawmakers at every level, especially on an issue such as gun ownership. So actually, I think the solution to the US problem is more democracy and less money in the system, so that lawmakers start reflecting what their constituents want. That may take a little bit of the heat out. I mean, take a leaf out of Ukraine's book. Decentralization, more democracy is the solution, I think, to this sort of incipient authoritarianism and oligarchic slide.
Yes, I'm going to go off on a sidebar here, Jonathan, just because there's a comment here from Colonel Angus that says London is safe, as in this idea that, you know, what are you talking? I don't know what the conversation that this commenter was having, but it's interesting when you talk about violence, and they talked about this with regard to Chicago and Washington and places in the US. Large cities have more violence because there are more people there, right? But actually, when you compare violence per 100,000, it's often other places that are statistically more violent. And it's really interesting. London, as a particular example, I remember reading a book by a Carla called Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire. And it's one of the single best books I've ever read. Actually, I listened to it on audiobook, and I advise anyone to do that. It's an astounding piece of work. But he, as a black guy, of Jamaican descent in the UK, being born and brought up in I think London, and been talking about violence and knife crime and all this stuff. One particular thing he said, what I thought was fascinating. I know this is not to do with Charlie Kirk at all, particularly, but I just thought I'd say this. In the UK, you often hear this phrase that the black on black violence in London is terrible, like the knife crime with black people on black people. And he's like, right, you do realize that knife crime is higher in other places in the UK than London. So example, you've got Cleveland, West Midlands, Greater Manchester, and he used the example, so all of those areas have higher knife crime rates per 100,000 than London. And he said Glasgow had, at the time of writing, had the highest knife crime rate in the UK, but no one ever talked about white on white knife crime. Like, no one ever talked about white on white murder. And he's like, in Glasgow, all of the crime is white on white, but you don't call it white on white. Why would you call it black on black in London? Why would you like cherry pick that data point? And I thought that's fascinating. It's often all about poverty and other determining factors, and you get the correlation fallacy and all this stuff. But we need to be very careful. I guess my large point is we need to be careful when we have these quite overarching generalized views about, London is safe, London is violent, London is this, London is that. Whereas I'd be like, I don't know the stats on London. I'm not going to cast my opinion on London compared to other cities. Cities are more violent than the local village, arguably. But actually, if my local village has a mentalist in and he's pretty violent, and there's only 10 people living in the village, then actually my local village is more violent than London per like 10 people of population. So, stats are important, and we need to have a good grasp of what we're talking about when we make really significant claims. So anyway, I just wanted
it's attention grabbing as well. I mean, not everything is purely political. Sometimes it's a combination of certain narratives gaining attention, certain narratives having a certain clickbait quality to them, and black on black is one of those things. Why is it more clickbaity? Well, it plays on prejudice. It's a phrase that plays on fear and othering, of course, but just linguistically, physically, it's something that's going to grab attention. And then when things become these sort of set narratives, they then get repeated. It becomes almost like a narrative mythology. But yeah, I mean, the media plays a role in amplifying some of these things.
And again, it's not to do with the core subject matter here, but again, I can't help but react to certain claims. So black people are 13% of London's total population. Black Londoners account for 45% of London's knife murder victims as of 2022. That is why. So account for knife murder victims. I don't know if you're talking about perpetrators as well, but of course you've got the correlation fallacy. So we can look at Hitler and Stalin, and we can say, European dictators both have moustaches there. Therefore, people with moustaches are more likely to, mass murder people and do genocide. And you're like, okay, is the moustache a determining variable? No, it's not. And so, correlation fallacies are very important to understand. So when we're understanding why people commit crime, when we're understanding low aspiration societies, we need to communities, we need to understand the role poverty plays. The role poverty plays with in aspiration in terms of IQ as well. So IQ is lowered in more poverty-stricken areas, so on and so forth. So when you talk about crime, is poverty more likely a driver than whether you have melatonin in your skin? Do you know what I mean? Like, it literally does melatonin, to some genetic component of someone who is a person of color, are they more likely to cause violence to the percentage that we're talking about here? So there's an overrepresentation of say black people in crime stats, then that would be, I think, incredibly egregious to put that down to the color of their skin and not
related to poverty, access to education. There are other correlations which potentially are also pertinent.
Yeah, equality of opportunity, all sorts of things. So I don't want to derail it too much, but I have written extensively on that previously, and in fact, one of my guest writers, when I used to write for Patheos, we did a series on actually race and IQ, and also I've written on the propensity to violence with the warrior gene and all sorts. So, I'm coming at this from a position of knowing a little bit what I'm talking about here. We just need to be careful, always need to be careful when we're talking about stats and we're talking about causal relationships between A and B, and always wondering whether actually C could be responsible for both A and B rather than A causing B. So, it's life is complicated, and we are very prone to simplifying things to fit agendas that are what we want to hear. But anyway, going back to what might happen in the political landscape in the US, unfortunately, I think you are going to see weeks of political division as a result of this. And the other thing that I think is a shame is that this will sideline other exceptionally important things, whether that be the Epstein scandals, whether that be Ukraine, the drones going into Poland last night. There was a big news thing suddenly that's kind of effectively going to disappear, certainly in the American political discourse. And so I think that we're gonna see, I think, saturation reporting on this topic for weeks to come, and sadly in a way that we didn't see it when Melissa Hortman was gunned down in her house.
This is it. And whereas I'm not implying that Russia is behind this killing, because plenty of things happen and Russia has nothing to do with them. However, their long-term plan, of course, their long-term deepest desire, if you listen to their propagandists and indeed their military strategists, is for the US to be engulfed by chaos, for the US to be engulfed by a kind of civil war of families turning on families, parties on parties, and for the US to tear itself apart. That is their deepest strategy and desire, irrespective of whether Trump is in the White House or not. That's the long-term goal. If you listen to Solovyov, they loop back to this, and when they get onto this topic, it is with absolute glee that they discuss it. So this kind of politically inspired killing, which has to be condemned, nonetheless plays into the longer-term narrative that Russia is trying to bring about.
Truth should not be just social. Thank you for the super chat. They say there have been 6 fatal shootings in London in 2025. I'm not sure what the point being made here is. I just thought it'd be interesting to compare the US to the UK. US has a significantly higher rate of gun deaths per 100,000 than the UK, though the exact numbers vary year to year from data source to data source. For example, one report from 2023 cited the US rate at 4.31 deaths per 100,000, while the UK's rate was 0.013. I mean, the difference between those two numbers, approximately 340 times higher in the United States, which is just a phenomenal difference there. But stats are somewhat difficult to come by in the US because unfortunately the Republicans put a kibosh on the CDC collecting gun death stats, and there's a lack of police gun death stats as well, and it's a bit frustrating that in a place where you really need the best stats as possible, with so much happening there, that they're actually quite difficult to come by in some contexts. So I just got a few super chats that I'm just going to go through. Daryl Thomas, been working away. Great job, guys, on Poland. Who benefits the most? Patriot orders from US will skyrocket. We're not talking Ukraine today, but Daryl, thank you very much. That is something I am going to talk about, obviously, a lot tomorrow. So I will talk about the ramifications for Poland in tomorrow's videos. But thank you. I'll bank that thought. Hillbilly Skeptic says authoritarianism is a natural response to immoral cultural Marxism. Perversion, multiculturalism, violence, and vagrancy came from progressives. I'm not sure that is at all true.
What a remarkable salad of nonsense. Sorry, I'm going to be a bit more pushy with that one. An absolutely ludicrous and actually vile load of toss. Sorry, hillbilly, you're talking crap.
Cultural Marxism is one of these terms that is so ill-defined. I'd love to actually ask Hillbilly, please really explain without going and looking online what you think cultural Marxism is, because I see it bandied around a lot, and I'm fairly sure most people just think it's some kind of just liberalism in general, and it leads to perversion, multiculturalism. That's obviously seen as a bad thing here. Perversion, violence, and vagrancy are all things that progressives obviously give birth to in some way. So authoritarianism is a natural response. So it's the only way to cure that is to just
except in the UK, where
dictatorial.
mass vagrancy was really initiated by a right-wing government closing down the lunatic asylums and chucking them into the community. So I'm sorry, these things don't go together. They are genuine problems, but they do not go together. It's a set of poorly matched things that don't accord with reality, I'm afraid.
And actually, there's something to be said about, well, where's vagrancy? Probably a lot less. And having just said we should be careful with stats, I'm going to make a speculation here. But I would speculate that vagrancy is better in the Nordic nations than it is in the United States. And is vagrancy, there are fewer in the Nordic states than in the UK. What do the Nordic states have? Really good social welfare net to catch people, and to, what do you have in the prisons in Norway to stop high recidivism rates? So where in the US you might have 80% recidivism rate, so 80% of people who go to prison are going to come back to prison when they get out of prison, whereas in Norway, if I remember correctly, it's somewhere around 30%. So what does Norway do? Well, they actually have what some people might say really liberal prisons. People go to prison and they get tooled up with skills. Because the idea is that it's really expensive if you just keep doing crimes and you keep going through the justice system, you keep ending up in prison where the taxpayer has to pay for you in prison. So we'd rather just tool you up and give you skills so that when you get out of prison, you don't come back into prison. But people that come and look at that go, why are you being all liberal? Why are you giving these horrible people skills? These are criminals. No, well, we want them to be criminals for a short while and then not be criminals and be reintegrated back in society. So, the idea that vagrancy and violence comes from progressives, when actually, if you look at a social democratic nation that has more progressive values, they actually do a better job of violence and vagrancy than other nations. So I would completely contest that, and it's a lot more complex than left-right ideas there. So thank you for the super chat, Hillbilly Skeptic, but I would hugely disagree with that, and I would also probably bring some receipts with that as well. Just another one, JJ. I'm from Texas. Or was that JJ? Was that? Yes. I know the mentality of MAGA very well. What scares me isn't violence against politicians and influencers. This is a leap toward violence against ordinary citizens and non-citizens. I think there is a sense that violence is being normalized, and I mean that beyond, say, TV, films, and computer games. I mean, in terms of we are just seeing violence on the streets. We see ICE being violent. We see these political assassinations. We see, I think, a lot of violence over the last few years that I don't know makes it's becoming normalized, and I do worry about that. But yes, I think people in America have the right to be worried about political violence as well as non-political violence. I think all sorts of violence is rife at the moment. Michael Vuchar, thank you very much for your ATP Geopolitics memberships. Really appreciate that. And just finally, for the time, sending soldiers to cities to police will also lead to unneeded violence that will fuel future violence. It's a bad time here. People are not thinking. I mean, yeah, sending the National Guard to cities is actually it improves crime in the short term, because obviously if you're going to have an absolute ton of soldiers walking through your city, people are going to be less inclined to do crime, and that's just prima facie obvious. Then someone like Trump will look at that and go, look, this is really successful. Yeah, okay, well, if you have martial law in a city, yeah, crime is going to be less. So you either have martial law and authoritarian dictatorship forever in every city right across the United States, or you try and deal with crime in a more democratic fashion with more, you know, in a more compassionate and sustainable way. I worry that, again, you know, having the National Guard and soldiers in cities and stuff like that, again, it normalizes a kind of a violence, or certainly an authoritarian approach to solving problems. But yeah,
and very expensive as well. And also, we know from Northern Ireland, I mean, that's soldiers are not trained for necessarily policing activities. They can be trained for peacekeeping, but they're not trained for that sort of the subtle art of diffusing tension and policekeeping activities. And it's a tinderbox. You know, one mistake by, you know, armed soldiers on the streets of US City, and you've got absolute carnage, and you're just increasing the probability of that happening by sending them into those situations. And we haven't even mentioned ICE. I mean, what ICE is doing is horrific. You know, it's an invasion of people's communities, which is extremely violent. Or an assault upon sort of all the norms of civic society, as well as starting to sort of eat into the sort of the separation of powers, but the separation of powers amongst the states versus federal level. So it's unsurprising that in this heightened atmosphere, you will get events like the one we've seen today. Again, not to condone it, but if you hype up the political environment, then you will have these unforeseen tragedies.
Again, so people saying things in the comments that made me go. So Lag Monster says, we do have vagrants here in Denmark too, though. Last I heard, it was about 10 to 15,000 per 6 million of population. I just did a quick bit of research on that as Jonathan was speaking. Denmark has a substantially lower rate of homelessness than the US, a difference attributed to Denmark's comprehensive welfare system and strong social values. So pretty much what I was saying previously.
It's also bloody cold there, isn't it? You don't want to be on the street, isn't it?
Well, yeah, actually, those the interesting.
Winter, anyway.
Yeah. No, it could be there could be something in that. In the US, homelessness is more visible and more frequently linked to poverty and housing affordability, whereas in Denmark, it's more concentrated among people with complex support needs. A high percentage of homeless individuals. The extensive welfare system provides a stronger safety net for its citizens, which helps to reduce the overall rate of homelessness. So, you know, I think. And we can bring this back to talking about gun violence and violence in general. Is that, you know, how do we deal with that? Well, you could be all authoritarian about it, have no kind of social welfare net, and just say, well, if you're going to do gun violence, we're going to put you in prison, or we're going to. So, for example, Donald Trump, we had the horrific murder of the Ukrainian refugee. Irina Yakovets or something like that. Sorry, I can't remember her surname. Who was killed by the guy on a train, and then that's been politicized by people like Elon Musk again, because the guy was black, and he's saying, "Oh, I don't see any people with Ukrainian flags in their bios talk about this horrible incident," and try to politicize that. But Trump's then come out and said that guy should be just put to death.
No, Musk. We're busy talking about the 24 pensioners massacred by a missile yesterday. Yeah. We're busy talking about the mother and her child massacred. So, yeah, I mean, they can have a go at us for not covering that story, which actually is not true. Plenty of Ukrainians have put it in their bios. But they're ignoring the elephant in the room. They're ignoring the grotesque murders that are happening day in, day out across Ukrainian cities. So, Musk, fuck you. Literally.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, what I was going to say about Trump, though, is that rather than come out and it's the idea that, well, if we just give this guy capital punishment, so it's like we need to give this guy the death penalty. It's like, okay, well, we know that, and sorry for those who might think the death penalty is really good, but actually, again, data shows, and I've done a lot of research on this because I've written on this too, but data shows that harsh penalties are not an effective way to affect behavior change. So you're not going to, it's not deterrence. So the best deterrence is the percentage chance of getting caught, right? So if you want to do something about stopping crime, then people need to, first of all, have the kind of framework, mental framework, not to want to commit crime. There's got to be, you know, social and moral teaching and good education and good family lives or whatever, all that kind of stuff there. But then it's not just, you know, threatening capital punishment and that will solve it. I mean, that's like kind of old school, like Old Testament retribution. Whereas actually what you want to be saying is, well, how can we improve policing? How can we improve mental health support for those who are on the fringes of society? How do we stop recidivism? Again, it goes back to the point before. So the guy that murdered the Ukrainian refugee was let out of prison early. Well, the question is, rather than blaming the judge for letting him out of prison early, the question should always be, well, why did the judge let him out of prison early? Well, there's too many people in prison and there's too much pressure on. So, okay, so what do we do about that? Should we be imprisoning people on drugs charges, for example? Should that be a health issue or a crime issue? And then we go back to the 50s and we talk about the 13th Amendment to the Constitution and the fact that, you know, that could have been turned into a criminal thing so it could imprison more black people, as according to the documentary The 13th, if you go and watch that. So, you know, these are complex issues, but like, it's not going to be solved by harsher punishments. It's just like, so if I was the president of the US, I would stand hard on that crime and you know robust punishment and whatnot, but then I'd be saying we really need to have a deep dark look at ourselves to understand why this is happening. Why are people getting let out of prison too early? Why are our prisons overcrowded? How are we funding our prisons in the United States? What is the role of the private sector in the prisons? Are they not interested in rehabilitating people because a revolving door gets them more money and just a consistent revenue stream? And so stuff like that, like those are the questions that need answering. So solving these issues are much more complicated matters than just throwing around, oh, we're going to give this person a death penalty.
That's it. And as a percentage of population, I think in the US, I don't have the stats to hand. You may be able to get your hands on them, but the percentage of the population who are incarcerated is far beyond almost any other country in the Western world. It has to be said that the next highest, I think, is actually Britain. Britain bangs up a much higher percentage of its population than most European countries, and there's violence of various sorts here. I mean, Britain is not and has never been an entirely peaceful country. If you look at the history of London, and to that point someone made earlier, what about London? Well, actually, London has always historically been not just, it's always had an element of chaos. It's always had an element of violence. That's both criminal violence, but also political violence. But it's also for centuries had a far, I would say, freer culture than most European cities did. That brought with it, element of, dare I say it, sort of chaos. You go back to the 18th century, even the 19th century, and these extraordinary stories of riots and murders. It's never been peaceful, but it has always had an extraordinary energy to it, at least the last couple of centuries. So I think that's an interesting question. As to whether you can have, extraordinary freedoms without some degree of, unpleasantness and chaos. Possibly not.
Said mass shootings at a high school in Colorado. We did talk about that at the top end of the program. At the same time as, sadly, as Charlie Kirk was shot and killed, there was also a shooting in a Colorado school in Denver, Evergreen High School, where I think 2 children, last I heard, were in critical condition. I may be wrong there, but these happen far too often. Something needs to change, but change seems to be hard to come by when it comes to gun violence in the United States. I guess, to sort of wrap this up tonight, Jonathan, my request would be that we are all careful not to politicize this, but it's going to be difficult when our side will get attacked by the other. And I mean that no matter who you are, because the left will try and opportunistically take advantage of this or defend their position and then talk about other incidents where the right were at fault, and the right will try and generally will try and opportunistically claim that this is due to the left's X, Y, and Z, and it's the Democrats' problem, and it's blah blah blah, and you're going to get this battle over the next, you know, few weeks, no doubt. And you know, people will be forgetting Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, and Melissa Hortman, and then the killer, and you know, all the different shooters. And the thing is, you're going to have a range of people. What's the biggest commonality? I don't know, probably mental health issues. But is it right to give a baby a razor blade? Probably not. So should we allow people with mental health issues to have guns? Probably not. So yeah, those are my kind of thoughts. What are you thinking?
I think that there has to be a nuanced debate, but in the current political climate, it seems that nuanced debate is something that is very hard to come by. And I mean, those of us, I think of it, who like to inhabit the reality-based community, it feels increasingly sort of isolated because people are not willing to engage with numbers, stats, reasoned debate, or hear the other person out. I think it's interesting that Charlie Kirk would put himself into environments where and be surrounded by people who didn't necessarily agree with him at all. That I have a certain admiration for people who are prepared to come out of their, you know, back rooms and directly challenge. Now, of course, it's also part of his shtick. It's also part of the contrarian approach that he had. But nonetheless, I think if you are prepared to come out and put yourself in a room of those who disagree with you, there is a certain type of bravery to that, actually, irrespective of whether I agree with your opinions or not. That means that this is deeply a sort of shocking event. For instance, Tucker Carlson wouldn't do the same, and there are others who wouldn't put themselves in those environments. So from that point of view, I mean, it's a terrible thing, which we'd be much better off if this hadn't happened today.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty divisive going forward. You know, the White House has lowered its flag to half-mast in Charlie Kirk's honor, which is obviously a nice thing to do. But then the first thing I go to is like, you literally had politicians that were murdered in on July the 4th, I think it was, in Minnesota, and there was no half-mast there. Literally, 2 people shot their door. So, like, yeah, I guess it's one rule for one for the other, and that's a problem we're going to see going forward. I think,
and I would say do good in the world, right? Before you jump on your keyboard and start screaming at people, unless it's Elon Musk, you can scream all you like at him because he's a vile nut. Before engaging in this sort of, you know, rage posting, we should all just take a step back and, well, what can we do to make the world a better place? And I've just popped you over the link there because we have a solution to what you can do to make the world a better place, and that is buy trucks for people in Ukraine to help save soldiers. I don't know if it's the right format to put that up, but given my audience is here and it's quite a big audience, I thought it'd be quite good.
I'll go and find it here, but just to let you know that what has gone on there, that they have found sorry, I can't get my words out at the moment. They have now in custody the suspect in the fatal shooting. The subject for the horrific shooting today that took the life of Charlie Kirk is now in custody, said FBI Director Kash Patel. Thank you to local and state authorities in Utah for your partnership with the FBI. We will provide updates when able. So that's good news. They found the shooter. It's going to be interesting. I mean, this guy's surely going to be politically motivated. I can't think that he won't be. But that knowledge will just drive such huge divisions. It's gonna, something not to look forward to. Car for Ukraine, if you can spare a penny for our campaign here, you got silicon curtains just been added. So at the bottom with 0. So if you can help Jonathan to get his campaign up and running, we've been going for a wee while at ATP Geopolitics. We're in 4th place at the moment. If you can help out there, make sure you click on whichever one you want to help support, and that would be really, really appreciated.
I sure spent out launching the campaign today. That's why it's on 0, not because everybody hates me. I've literally moved from doing other campaigns, and this is the first day of this one and the first mention in the first video. So that's why.
Yeah, that's why. And nothing to be ashamed of there. Everyone has to start somewhere. Thank you, Kevin Force, for your ATP Geopolitics memberships. I really appreciate that, mate. And thank you for watching. Yeah, did we succeed in doing what we set out? I didn't really know what I was going to talk about too much, other than it's just going to be bloody divisive, and I'm not looking forward to the next sort of week really. But make sure that when you are conversing with people, I guess we need to do it with restraint and with decency. But it gets really hard when you, like, I always have these really haughty values of trying to have nice and genteel discourse, and then I read a tweet by Elon Musk and I just want to go and punch him in the face. So like, and then I get really angry, and then you get into a spiral of not following your own desires in the way that you conduct yourselves in conversation. So, you know, pull me up if I'm ever stepping over the mark, but it's going to be tough to keep to that over the next few weeks, because I just think there's going to be so much shouting at each side.
You can tell that from the comments in this video. I'm going through them already. We got a lot of whack jobs in there, posting some, you know, deranged, hateful rubbish. There's some good people in there too, to quote Trump. But there's some deranged nonsense in there. I didn't mean to quote Trump there. And I guess there's some nice people there too.
Going back to Charlottesville. Hey, they're good people on both sides. Yes. Anyway, yes. So thank you for all of you for watching. I hope that you got something out of this. Let's hope that justice is done. But people don't go too crazy, and there isn't too much retribution taken out on just like the other side.
Why is Mr. Fink insulting us? I didn't mean everybody. I just meant there are a few people sort of throwing, you know, starting to throw the proverbial turds at each other.
Has Michael got a guilty complex there?
I don't think so. I didn't mean everyone.
Guilty conscience.
But you can see the weaponization. I mean, we had the weaponization of the murder of the Ukrainian displaced person, as we saw earlier. And, you know, I was thinking, you know, how could we cover this story in a way that that brings benefit to Ukraine? I decided in the end that I couldn't see a way. You're simply pouring petrol onto some very divisive flames. This story, I mean, I joined this not because I wanted to have a pop at Charlie Kirk. In fact, obviously concluded with maybe something that may be positive that we can think, you know, is something who's prepared to debate people publicly, which I think is some kind of strength, even if you don't agree with anything that person says. No, I think the real consequences of this are going to be that the US turns inwards, and I would encourage people not to forget Ukraine in this, because the adversaries of the US, that's exactly what they want. They want the US to turn in on itself. They want it to block the world out. They want it to feel like it's isolated and vilified. And that means the dictators of the world can crack on with what they want to do, which is carving up and destroying the democracies of the world. So don't let that happen. Don't let these horrors prevent you from also remembering Ukraine and what is now going to be unfolding in Europe, I fear.
Don't let this rhetoric take hold. This is Laura Loomer, who, gee whiz, they sent a trained sniper to assassinate Charlie Kirk while he was sitting next to a table of hats that said 47. You could be next. I hate to say it, but I have a sick feeling we'll be seeing more targeted assassination. The left are terrorists. And so it starts. Let's hope it doesn't.
For people who don't know who Laura Loomer necessarily is, she has a rather curious but extremely influential role, and has Trump's ear actually. I mean, there are stories that not everyone in the Trump administration necessarily likes her, but she definitely has Trump's ear, and as we saw there, she's spouting extraordinary degree of lunacy, toxic lunacy.
Yes, this is yeah. A shame to see that already. Anyway, look, thanks everybody. You take care, Jonathan. We'll get together and talk Ukraine, I guess, at some point going forward soon. As there's so much to talk about, and really, there's a lot of fallout to come from what took place in Poland last night. It'll be really interesting to see if. I mean, no, I was going to go on. I'm trying to say goodbye.
Just a heads up, I've got Keir Giles coming on to speak to me in the morning, and I'm going to publish that tomorrow evening. So again, it's hot off the press. Keir Giles is probably one of the best people to speak to at this point, because he's been predicting exactly this kind of escalation from Russia. So when we get that video out, probably it'd be good to sort of, maybe over the weekend or sometime next week to review when we know a little bit more about the escalatory steps that Russia is taking. Unfortunately, a lot of people in the US now are not going to be really having their eye on that. Maybe understandable, but still we have to encourage people to engage with the world.
Some people saying you need some good mods. You need to get onto YouTube when you are doing a live stream and right click on their names and turn them into mods to help you if they're people you trust.
Okay.
Otherwise you get infested.
We should do that. Yes, I've got an infestation.
Yes. Okay, well, take care, everybody. Stay on the line, Jonathan, and I will speak to all of you at great length tomorrow, no doubt, with far too many videos talking about what's going on around the world, and it's usually too much going on around the world. Please, just everyone calm the hell down. Take care, you all, and thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you.